roof, meetings together. So, how did you do this week? Domain B, project management, a little bit shorter than domain A. So, hopefully, you were able to honor your time blocks and really enjoyed this domain. Hopefully, knowing that it's only 6% of the exam took a little bit of the ease off of learning the material. The only housekeeping note I have this week is if you ordered a binder, tab number 12 has all of your assignments and all of the key terms printed for you. So tab 12 of your binder has those. So be sure to check that out. The only other thing I wanted to mention before we get started was about your time blocking. Everybody knows that I am a stickler for time blocking, and I really feel that that is the secret to getting through this information and being able to retain it if you are doing it in small doses. So I've done a lot of research on how to study as an adult. And one of the things that I learned was that we always tend to remember the first part of something that we learn, and we remember the last part of something. So it's called primacy and recency. So primacy, obviously, the very first thing, and then recency, the last thing. So it's that time in between. So you have primacy and recency, and then the time in between kind of just is a little bit of a blur. So if you can tighten up that start and stop time, you're going to remember more of the stuff in the middle. So that's why I recommend only studying 1 hour at a time. It really tightens up that gap between primacy and recency. So that's my this week's plug for time blocking. But that was pretty much all I wanted to say. So let's jump in and get started with project management. Domain B. So only 9 questions from the exam come from this domain. So this is what I felt was one of the biggest takeaways that you should have learned. So event management has 5 phases. We have initiation, planning, implementation, event, and closure. And they build on each other. So you want to know all 5 phases. So the IPIEC, initiation, planning, implementation, event, and closure. And then you also want to know what specific activities go under each of the phases. So starting with the initiation phase, this is where you're doing all of your research. You're defining the event's purpose. You are outlining the scope. The project scope is done in the initiation phase. Your goals and objectives are determined and set in this phase. Risk management strategies are instituted. So you are going to do your SWOT in this phase. So initiation is pretty much the biggest phase. So the very first one is when you're going to do most of the work. So that then goes to phase 2, the planning phase. This is where you gather your requirements and your specifications. So this is when you're going to send out all your RFPs, figure out all of your requirements that you need to build on the last step. So all the requirements that meet your goals and objectives, that fall within your project scope, things like that. All the things you researched, now you want to build on that and find out your requirements. And then after you've done that, you move into phase 3, which is implementation. So this is where goods and services are contracted. So all those RFPs you sent out in the last phase, well, now you're going to contract them. Also the operational and logistical requirements. So everything you need for your event that you did in the planning phase, that you researched and in initiation, and then send out all your RFPs and planning, and now you're contracting in the implementation phase. And then that leads you to the 4th phase, which is the actual event. So your event is held in the event phase. Gee, imagine that. So that one's easy to remember. So the event is held in the event phase, and this is when you're risk monitoring. So you set your risk management strategies in initiation, but now that the event is happening, you're monitoring your risk. And then lastly, this is the closure. So the event is over, the event is shut down, the contract's completed, everything that you've agreed to and contracted is now completed and done. This is when your feedback is collected from your stakeholders and attendees. and the event is evaluated. So that's when your surveys will go out. So this is the end, the final step. So again, 1 through 5, and they build on each other. So IPIEC, event 5 phases to event management. So the critical path was another big piece to this domain. So you want to, critical path is defined as it represents the chain of activities that must begin on time and stay on track in order to achieve project milestones and ultimately execute the project on time. So there's no flexibility with items in this critical path. So I have that little chain link down there. So think of the critical path as this chain of activities. That's in the definition there. So think of a chain. You can't take out the middle piece of a chain, or otherwise it all falls apart. So there's no flexibility with items in the critical path, and one kind of relies on the other. So knowing how critical path is defined and all of the pieces is, you definitely want to make sure that you are familiar and comfortable with that. Then we had the work breakdown structure, talked about ESGs, we talked about RFPs, and this is a clickable link. I can send you the PDF if you're watching this video. Reach out to me at cmp@meetingstogether.com, and I can give you this PowerPoint. But it has clickable links, and it takes you to the EIC website that has Word documents and PDFs for all of these things. So if you need a template for an RFP, here, I think I have them actually up here. So this is a template for the RFP. So this is an RFP proposal here, which is kind of neat. So this I clicked on was the PDF version, but they also have a Microsoft Word. This is the ESG, so your event specifications guide, and this is like 20 some pages, 27 pages. So you want to really you don't want to just read about something like, okay, I know what the ESG is, I know the definition now. You really want to seek out other opportunities to really make a connection with something that you already know. Or if you don't have a connection of what an ESG is, then you want to look at an example of one like this. So I suggest printing it out, kind of filling it out, pretending you can either use it for the organization that you plan meetings for, or if you're, a hotelier, you can use a fake association or make up. I, in my course, use the Dancing Santas Association. So, just kind of get in there and get your hands dirty and fill things out and, kind of learn by doing. It will help your memory and help retain. And then the Apex contracts. This is amazing. This is a really great source. It's the Apex contracts accepted practices. So basically, all of the contract clauses that you are familiar with in contracts will be in here, and it tells you a little bit about the purpose of the clause. Here, let me just roll down here. Let's see. Okay, so like the attrition for food and beverage. So it gives you the definition of what the clause actually is, the purpose of the clause. So, why you would want to consider putting that in there, approaches to consider. So it's really, really a great piece of information to help with contracting and help strengthen your ability to read contracts and know how to audit the contracts. How to audit the contracts and really know what to look for. And remember, a contract is to protect both parties. So the hotel obviously has the interest of the hotel in mind, and the meeting planner has the interest of the meeting planner in mind. So the two parties need to come together and decide on an agreement that they both can agree on and that both parties are protected on. So that is definitely one of the purposes of the contract. Okay, let's get back to here. So again, clickable links, awesome, dig in. Clauses to review and know, termination clause. You can go back and click on that link and read up on all the different contracts, but the main ones, the termination, which is, basically terminating as if the contract was never written. Cancellation, if somebody cancels, either the the client, the planner, or the hotel can cancel on a group. It can happen. Either party can cancel on each other at any time. Force majeure, any act of God, and we're going through all of this right now with COVID, right? Attrition clause. So you contract for 100 rooms, but only 50 of the rooms actually pick up. So now you're in an attrition situation. Indemnification, which is holding saying that you're not responsible for third party claims. So if you're at the hotel and your event has a dinner and you rented a fan, you've got a DJ and a bubble machine, and one of your attendees slips and falls from your bubble machine that you had and sues the hotel. Well, you could be liable too because you provided the bubble machine. So indemnification, most planners and hoteliers are savvy in knowing that having a mutual indemnification clause is the way to go, saying that each party will indemnify each other and saying, yeah, no, I'm not at fault, you're not at fault, from any third party claims. And then insurance, and making sure that you have a policy saying that, you know, every association has, or every corporate has insurance, and just naming the hotel as a party insured. And then dispute resolution, so that is you know, ahead of time deciding if we don't agree on something, how are we going to resolve it? Are we going to do mediation, arbitration, you know, deciding ahead of time. So again, that's the clickable link for contracts. And then some best practices when contracting. Initial contracts should be reviewed carefully, and clauses need modification should be identified. So basically, again, a contract is to protect both parties. So you want to make sure that you understand what you are signing a contract for, and that goes for both sides. You want to know what you're signing, and you want to make it easily understanding. You don't need fancy lawyer terms. You want to make it as easy as possible and as clear as possible on what everybody's agreeing to. So signing parties should be identified if they have authority to legally bind their organization. Event professionals are encouraged to have legal counsel review contracts. All contracts should be in writing. Oral contracts are not recommended. Also, once the contract is signed, any other conversations you've had over the phone, emails that you've had, if those are all null and void. The contract is the final version. So make sure that everything you've agreed to is in that contract. I used the example before that, you know, the hotel may have agreed to 1 per 40 comp and everybody was in agreement, but it wasn't included in the contract. So legally, the hotel is not liable and not required to follow up and offer that 1 per 40 comp because it was not in the contract. So even though they agreed to it and it's in writing, it is just an email and is not part of the contract. So contract language should be straightforward and understandable. Again, it does not have to be fancy. Stop with the lawyer talk. You know, let's make it straightforward and know that, okay, if this happens, this is what we're going to do. So negotiation should always be done in good faith and in accordance with ethical business practices. It's not hotel against planner and vice versa. I'm not, you know, bringing you millions of dollars, so you should give me everything I want. It's, you know, negotiations are, I will give you this if you give me this. And it's a give and take on both parties. So, and then lastly, contract should clearly identify how risks are allocated between the parties. So again, if it's clear and straightforward language, then this should be easy. All right, so we're at the end. See, it went pretty quick. So project management, again, only 9 questions from the exam come from this domain. So 6% of the exam. So let's go over, this is again, this CMP International Standards for Domain B. So skill 4, plan, meeting, or event project. So you want to ask yourself if you feel like you could explain to someone how you would go about planning a meeting and how that would be set up. So in subskill 4.1, develop project plan based on meeting needs to align with goals and objectives. So this is your roadmap. Remember, um, each meeting is going to look different, whether it's a small meeting or a large meeting, whether you're having an incentive, a training, a product launch. They'll all have a project plan. It will just look different for each one. So this is where you would also refer back to those 5 event management phases. And do you remember what phase that you plan out your goals and objectives? Yes, phase 1, the initiation phase. So make sure that you know the 5 phases and how you move through those phases, making sure that each phase and step aligns with your goals and objectives. And within that project plan, you have the tools that will help develop the project plan, like the Gantt chart, which is that graphical illustration of the schedule, the work breakdown structure. And remember, no matter what size of the meeting, you are always referring back to your project plan on a regular basis. Skill 5, manage meeting and event project, manage the critical path to complete the project plan. So we just talked about the project plan, but what about the critical path? Do you know how to explain what critical path is and how it's managed? So remember, your critical path was that chain link fence slide. Do you remember that? It's the critical path because it represents the chain of activities that must begin on time and stay on track in order to achieve those projected milestones, to make sure that the project starts and ends on time. And you always want to make sure that you're reviewing your critical path. It's got the word critical, so you kind of got to pay attention to it. So in monitoring it, creating those project status reports, informing your stakeholders, keeping that line of communication open. Skill 5.2, develop and manage contract management plan to meet stakeholder expectations and meeting requirements. So how comfortable do you feel about contracting and negotiating with your vendors? Remember that we always want to get everything in writing and make it easy to read and make it fair for both parties. You want to review the main contract clauses that we talked about and knowing which clause is appropriate for each situation. And lastly, subskill 5.3, execute project management plan to meet goals and objectives. So we created the plan in the initiation phase, right? Then phase 2 was the planning requirements. Then phase 3 was implementing the plan. Then phase 4 was the actual event. So executing this project plan is in that phase. And then lastly, they don't mention this in the subskills, but the final phase is closure. Phase 5 is closure, where the event's done, the contracts have been fulfilled, and that's when you get your feedback and your evaluations. So that's it for project management, my friends. I hope this review is helpful and that you were able to understand the phases and the steps that go into each of those phases to carry out an awesome project management plan. So that's it for B. So coming up next week for C is Module 4, Domain C. It is just one skill. So don't be fooled, though. It's still like, what did I write down? 17 pages in Domain C for risk management, still skill 6. So 40 minutes to read and 40 minutes to watch the video. And then you're going to do terms and quiz. There are a lot more terms in Domain B than there were in Domain A. So make sure you give yourself 25, 30 minutes to look over the terms. And then, after Domain C, we're already done with the first trimester. So those inside of Pathway to Passing will have a first trimester quiz. And then we want to read PMM chapters 7 and 8 for Domain C. So that is your time block master. Make sure that you're time blocking these times and getting them on your calendar and on your schedule. And this was the wrap up. So for domain B, we read skills 4 and 5 in the EIC 9th edition, review contract clauses and definitions. We read chapter 3 in the PMM 6th edition book. We reviewed the domain quiz and key terms and completed the domain review. So that is it. Awesome. Way to go. I don't see, I do this every time and I can't remember how to bring back the camera. So, all right, well, I'm just going to hit stop now. So have a fabulous week. Just make sure to honor your time blocks, keep trucking, just keep focusing on one skill at a time. Okay. Do not get overwhelmed. Just focus on the skill in front of you. Keep taking those small steps that move you forward towards a better version of you. Have an awesome day. Bye.